enough, sort of enough, almost enough. What happens when there is not enough? Our guests now have written and illustrated a children's book that's based around Hannah, who is concerned about whether people on her street have enough, and her efforts to help them when she finds that they don't. The idea came from author Sarah Johnson, and the book has been illustrated by Deborah Hind. The pair have collaborated on a number of works, but the production of this one was a little different. It was made possible through a grant from Copyright Licensing New Zealand, and $1 from the sale of each book will go to a charity called Feed the Kids, which is based in Raglan. Sarah and Deb are with us now from RNZ's Kirikiriroa Hamilton studio. Good morning to you both. Kia ora kōrua.
Kia ora, Catherine.
Morena.
Who's who? Sarah, was that you first?
Yes.
Sometimes it's a kind of a cat and mouse game, and it takes you half the interview to work out who's who. So I'll just ask at the outset. Hey, look, lovely to have us with you, and Deb and Sarah. Let's just talk about the oranges, the origin of the book. A beautiful book. The idea began where?
Thank you for having us, firstly. We really appreciate being asked on the show. That's an interesting question, because I think when you write a story, you don't necessarily think about where it comes from, and either that the characters arrive, or the story arrive, or the setting arrives. But so then you have to retrospectively go back and think about it. But I guess it's definitely an idea I've been carrying for a long time, and wanting to write the story for children about children having the power to make a difference in their community, and also to write about communities where there's not enough, where there's often not enough, which of course is many New Zealand communities. So there was a kind of mixture of impetuses, I suppose. One of the main one would have to be the community I live in, which is Whangaroa Raglan, which thankfully is a quite extraordinary community in terms of community spirit. So I guess living within that for a long time and seeing how people operate to make sure that everybody's okay within our community in many different ways was one of the main drivers. Yeah.
Do children worry? And, you know, with all they're hearing at the moment and all the world's going through at the moment, do they worry, and can they personalise that worry in some ways? That they'll hear about problems in the world, but then they will worry about someone close to them because their world is comparatively small at that age. And will they think about, I don't know, an old lady in the house next door and how she is?
I think children are very observant and are often very aware of what's going on in the seemingly adult world around them. And that, yes, I mean, anyone who's had children around them will have had the experience of being embroiled in an adult conversation and then looking around and seeing that smaller person on the sidelines, listening in intently. And, yeah, I think they do. They may not always see it in the same way as an adult, but they're definitely aware when there are bigger tensions around them.
In children's writing...
I think.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that was my perspective.
Yeah. In children's writing and writing for children, there's a tremendous power in giving them agency. In other words, they're not just observers or passengers being carried along. They're able to do something. We know this is why children love adventure stories, right? Or why they love Harry Potter. They can get out there and have some agency and make some change. And is that very much on your mind also?
Oh, it's one of the fundamentals of writing for children. You've got to have the children active within the story, solving their own issues. You can't have the big person coming in and solving everything for kids. It's kind of one of those rules which underpin children's writing. The child has to have agency. The child has to be a powerful force within the story.
Sarah, also, you talk about your community, which is close-knit and cares for each other, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But do you worry that some of that community reliance and interaction, we've lost it somehow? It's become, I don't know, people are just that much more burdened with their own stresses, or perhaps we are just seeing or overworked, or we're just seeing an erosion sometimes of community everywhere it should be.
Yeah, I don't know if I can really comment on that, because like I say, the community I live in, but a lot of people really love the community I live in, and I think that's why, because it does still have that. I don't know if that's a feature of small communities. nationwide, or in maybe larger places people drift apart. Certainly where I live, that's not apparent. But I know it's something that's a general feeling that there is this kind of dissolution of community.
So, Deb, how did you become involved? Did Sarah approach you?
Yes. I think it was actually a phone call originally with, CLNZ are doing a funding round, so how about I do the application? And I was really happy for that. And I was pretty busy at the time, so it was like, okay, that's fine, you do it, we'll see what happens, not expecting anything. And, very surprised in a pleasant way.
So
then we had to knuckle down and do the work.
Yeah, then it was all on. Okay, it was all on.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Now, we talked a little about writing for children and the importance of giving them agency and having them in the centre of things happening, sometimes in problem solving, a big instinct as well. For you, Deb, as an illustrator, what are the essentials that you want to bring to any story, and specifically to this one?
Yeah, this one, once I got the manuscript, even though Sarah had sort of briefed me on what the story was sort of about, it wasn't until I sat down with the manuscript that I realised how much work needed to go into it to meet all the expectations from an author and also from parents and children. So, yeah, and when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a cool play on word, enough. Do we have enough? I remember my mum knitting garments for pin money. She called it pin money, but it was basically a little bit of income to help with raising 5 kids, that sort of thing. And I just thought, there are so many young kids out there that are doing stuff in the community. So I really wanted to get across that while in many towns and cities, neighbours don't know each other, and I've been in that position, and then moving to rural Waikato where it's totally different with a small community that actually looks out for each other. I wanted to get across that even though everyone was living in their separate little houses, Hannah was the instigator for bringing that street together, and what a fantastic way that she did it.
There's a lot of characters. Hannah's obviously our star and our protagonist, but there's a lot of characters. Are you gritting your teeth as you say that?
I've done a lot of apologising over this book.
Let me turn to page where there's at least 14 people and a dog lined up. And what is the particular challenge of that? You're not drawing stick figures, you're drawing people, and there's a lot of thought go into the people who are going to make this. Absolutely,
yeah. And what I found was when I got the family sus pretty early on, and then it was, okay, we have a community of people, and I can't just draw a person and plonk them in. They actually have to have, in my head, they actually have to have a history of where they live in that street, who they're living with in that street, and how to bring this all together. And on that page where everyone is like getting more involved, they've obviously seen Hannah and worked out that she's doing a lot for them in her own little way. And then it was like, okay, so I've got this guy here. Now, who's he married to? Okay, so you're thinking constantly about the family dynamics within those other families in the street. And then, of course, on that page, I had to have the flow of the text running in such a way that people read it automatically in the right direction.
Yes. I can drive a van, I have a friendly face, I can dig, says the dog, I can sew, I have lots of space, I have a spare room. You're right, because it's a little bit like, when people arrange group photographs and you don't know who's in line, who's in row 2 and who's in the middle. There's a flow to this. There's a natural flow for the words and for the image. So I understand the challenge of that. I do love the community garden. It's a market day as well. And again, you're condensing what would be a much bigger space. You're condensing it into 2 pages to give us this lovely sense of what's happening.
Yeah, it's a snapshot. It's a feel for it, with people standing around chatting and getting given bags of food. Yeah.
Sarah, the words, they're quite sophisticated. There's almost a poetic rhythm to them. Nearly enough, sort of enough, almost enough, only enough, always plenty of hugs. But on Hannah's Street there was hardly enough, barely enough, not quite enough, and at times nowhere near enough, although some families felt they had plenty. We're talking about enough things now, food or whatever. There's almost a poetic rhythm and cadence to this. Children love that too.
Are you asking me to agree?
Yeah.
Or,
I don't know. Do you agree or disagree? I remember the great John McIntyre.
I absolutely agree. I was sorry. There was reservation there because I think all writers have their particular thing that they struggle with, and mine is undoubtedly that I love poetry and I love words and that balance between loving them and using the beautiful word and then making the text suitable for your audiences is a constant struggle for me. So I wasn't sure where you were going with that, whether you were
tell me about your struggles.
Approving or otherwise.
No, I was approving. No, I'm not judging it. I think it's wonderful. I do recall John McIntyre, we talked about this when young children are learning to read, that oral rhythm is a very important part of their learning and developing language. It just seems to help. So I wasn't critiquing your performance. I think it's wonderful. And again, whether it was intentional, whether in fact you're telling me you were trying to contain your impulses, you landed in a very good place.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It reminds me of the little engine that could. I know I can. I think I can. I know I can. But it's also quite a sophisticated meditation on the word enough, to Deb's point. Some people, for very, very, what appears to be materially very, very little is enough. For others, they can have everything in the world and it's not enough. I think we can agree that too many people today don't have enough, which brings us again to the conversations children are hearing and giving them some agency. So tell us a little bit more about what Hannah does do.
So Hannah goes around, she observes first that people don't have enough, and it's not just necessarily material things. There's also company and care, or just enough smiles, or enough people in your life, which is a big issue for older people. And so then she goes about matching socks and baking cakes and doing all the kind of lower level things that any of us can do to make sure, I think any of us can do to make sure the people around us have enough of the things they need. For me, there's a kind of double-edged sword in there because primarily there's this observation that there are just so many people in New Zealand who don't have enough, and that appears to be widening, that gap between those who do. But then I really wanted people, adult and children readers, to think about the fact that actually also a lot of us have far too much, and we don't actually need quite the extent of the stuff that we do have, and that has implications. So there's two sides of enough, not having enough, which is what the story is about, but also what is enough. And I think having that conversation with children about what is enough. Do you actually need that? And from my perspective, we don't need a lot of the things we think we need.
So many conversations can be had out of this. Let's learn a little bit more about the way the copyright licensing fits in here, please. Can you explain, someone?
Oh, yes, I'd really like to talk about that because we're so grateful. As in the publishing, if you're working in the publishing industry, it would be very hard, I think, to get a book like this published by a mainstream publisher, and that's for legitimate reasons. Publishers have things they're trying to run a business and they're trying to make a profit in a difficult sector, and so that in a way can limit, I think, the topics that can be written about or that would be picked up by a mainstream publisher. So I had this idea for ages, and I had a concept of the book, but really getting this grant from Copyright Licensing New Zealand meant it could actually happen, that we could actually go ahead and produce this beautiful book.
How does the scheme actually work, though?
Well, they have regular funding rounds that people can apply. People in the publishing sector can apply to. They always have that, and so there are grants available for various aspects of publishing, including research and actual physical book production. But last year they brought out a special round of grants that were for projects that responded to the changes in the New Zealand publishing environment as a result of the pandemic. So that was the round that we applied to, and they got over, I think, 1.2 million worth of applications, but they had $120,000 to distribute, which they did over 11 grants, I think. So we were very lucky that we got one.
And as for the how much of it from each book goes to the community? $1 from the sale of each book. This is your own decision, yeah, or is it part of the scheme?
Yes, that was part. When we put in the application, we said we'd do that because we wanted, if we were going to benefit from the grant if we got it. So we wanted someone else to benefit from it too. So we discussed that, and we did initially think about a national charity. But my partner, who's a social worker, suggested that it might have more impact for a local charity, so we chose one within Raglan Whangaroa.
Wonderful. Deb, enough books in our libraries that try and encourage kids to do something they absolutely have agency over, which is to help people out. Is there enough books on this theme, do you think?
I know that there is a trend at the moment for emotional literacy, but I don't think this particular book fits with that. So, are there enough books? Probably not. And this is totally New Zealand themed, so it would definitely, I would hope every school in New Zealand would have at least one copy of this book in their library and use it regularly because it has so much that teachers can use in the way of resources.
It actually goes to the heart of the inequities that are regrettably growing and rapidly in the context of the pandemic. But it does it in a lovely way. It's not preachy. I tell you the other thing, what we are learning about our brains and our chemicals is that one of the quickest ways to get a hit of happiness and the bonding chemicals is to do something for someone. I don't know, sometimes it's as simple as letting someone, letting a bus driver out in front of you and you get a wave out the window and you get an immediate boost. Humans are wired to be rewarded for helping each other. And for children to learn about this and ways to do this, as we said, not sort of an onerous, oh, you should or you must, but because it feels good,
Yeah. It's a good thing to do. Yeah.
That concept of enough, though, back to your point, Sarah, that concept of enough and having a conversation about some people not having enough and some people having too many, it is absolutely a tool to have those discussions in a kind of an appropriate way, yeah?
Yeah, I think the other fabulous thing about it, and this is not down to me, this is down to Deb, and her fabulous illustrations, is you could... To me, I love this book because I love the pictures, and the pictures are typical New Zealand street. You could go to most towns or villages in New Zealand and you would see this street. And I grew up in Fairfield and Hamilton, and this was my street. And I know Deb lived in Pukekohe, was it?
No, Papatoe.
Papatoe.
Yeah.
And it was her street. And I think that's important for children to be able to pick up a book and see themselves and see their street. So that it's their story and it's their place. Many books, well, they don't necessarily portray it in a way that would be recognisable.
How many times, Deb? How many times have you two collaborated now?
Ooh.
She's not allowed to say too many.
There's the Garden Secrets book, right, which is a book the Hamilton Gardens asked you to write. Goodness, how did you illustrate that, Deb?
Oh, that was so much fun.
That was so fun, yeah. That I was illustrating that in lockdown So I couldn't go back to the gardens.
Oh,
but I had such fun working on the pages because it was just so bright and uplifting and colourful.
and prior to that, the gardens, when they commissioned us, they wanted it based. It's a book based around the doors in Hamilton Gardens, and they gave us a list of 10 or 11 doors, and they said that this is what the book's about. So then we had to wander around the gardens endlessly, drinking coffee and looking at doors and talking about story ideas, which was just bliss, really.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're still having fun after, I think it's 5 times, my notes tell me, 5 books together. I'm glad you're still having fun and inspiring each other and others. Thanks very much for coming in and talking about it.
Oh, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Sarah Johnson, Deborah Hind. The book is Enough, a story about community. Written by Sarah, illustrated by Deb. Picture Book Publishing, the publishers. And as we said, every copy will see a contribution made to Feed the Kids, which is in Raglan. $1 from the sale of each book will go to Feed the Kids based in Raglan.